The goal of my photos has always been to capture more than just what a moment looked like. I want to capture how it felt. It's about bringing in those intangible elements, like the quality of light, the subtle interplay of tones, and the atmosphere that makes a scene truly come alive. For me, editing is where the vision comes together. It's not just about tweaking colors or sharpening details, it's about shaping the image to evoke a specific emotion. And at the heart of my editing process is masking. Masking is what allows me to isolate areas of an image and fine-tune them with precision. Without it, I simply couldn't create the photos I love. In this video, I'll walk you through why masking is so powerful and how you can use it to transform your editing process. If you've ever wondered what it is that truly separates some of the best looking photos from some of the worst, well, of course, it starts with the story, the narrative, the location, the composition, but it ends with the edit. And the single most powerful tool we have in our editing suite is going to be our masks. Today, I'm going to talk about why I use those masks and really specifically how to use them for the best effect. I'm going to be using Lightroom Classic for this because this is where I edit most commonly, but masks are ubiquitous. They exist in Capture One, Luminar, DxO, Lightroom, whatever you use, masks are likely a part of it. So let's hop in and let's learn how to use the single most important tool you have as a photo editor. So to get started, we just need to hop into Lightroom, enter the develop module like we see here, and then go over to our masks, which are this little circle, or we can click Shift W. In here, the only thing to note really is that there are three categories. One, the AI masks. These are automatically going to detect your subject, your sky, or your background. Then we have our manual masks. This is going to be how we actually add masks in using any kind of configuration we choose. And then finally, there's the third function, which is actually also AI, and it's a people mask. If there's a person in the frame, Lightroom will identify them and their features, but this is not a feature I really ever use, so I'm not going to cover it today. The first technique I want to go over has to do with sun flares. What we're trying to do is take the sun flare that's already there, so we're not adding, we're reacting, and we're just embellishing that sun flare. We want to bring that light into more of the frame, make it more clear, and make it a little softer. The way we do that is to start by creating a radial. Now I like to make a radial that has a very heavy feather, so we bring this little red dot and bring it towards the center so it's heavily feathered. I like to make it slightly thin, and then direct it in the way that the light is flowing through the scene. Now you can see right here that the light is hitting the top of this tree branch. In general, the light is coming down at an angle through this frame from the sky. That's why it already looks bright in this top left corner. So that's where we've built our radial. And then what we can do is start to build in the effect that that radial is going to have. I start by increasing the exposure just slightly, to taste really. Increasing the warmth just a little bit because I do think this is a warm scene. And then this is where things get really important. I drop the clarity close to -30 and the dehaze to right around -15 to -20. Now we can play with the size and shape as we like, but generally speaking, I think this looks quite good. So what we can do is click this little eye on the right side to see what the effect of that radial has had. You can see that it's basically taken the effect that was already there and amplified it. I think that looks really good, and I introduced that into a lot of my frames because the direction that the light is moving through the frame, the way it looks, this is really, really key to the ethereal look that I build into nearly all of my edits. Now the next technique I want to cover has to do with introducing a vignette-like effect. Now we're not going to introduce a true vignette that surrounds the entire frame with darkness. We're going to introduce it selectively, only to the parts of the frame that already have some darkness to them, just to amplify that and direct the focus inwards. The way I like to do that, and the way I'll do it in this frame, is by taking a linear gradient over here in our masks, and then pulling it over to affect just the corner that has some darkness already in it. We build that in, we can make it more gradual or less gradual. In this case, less gradual looks fine. And all I'm doing here is dropping the exposure just slightly, maybe dropping the contrast just slightly so that it's not too black. So at this point, taking all of our masks, just the two, we've directed the focus inward, created a bit more contrast, and ultimately embellished the light that was already in the scene. Very quick pause, because during the process of editing this video, I've gotten very close to finishing my ebook, An Introduction to Photographic Storytelling. This is going to be going on sale hopefully in the next 7 to 10 days, and I am so proud of it after 6, 7, 8 months of work. This is 150 pages of just about everything I know, and when you pair it with the editing process that I cover in my YouTube videos, you guys are going to be in a really good position to put together some beautiful visual series. So if you want to know when that comes out, and if you want to get half off of it when it comes out, sign up to my newsletter using the link down below, and you'll be all set. This next photo came on a particularly moody day during a 10-day trek I did in Peru with my dad and my wife. And this frame is one of my favorites from the whole trip because it's both ominous and dark, but also it exemplifies the scale of the experience so perfectly. And the light bleeding in on the background is kind of this juxtaposition with how ominous the darkness could be at times. So the photo is one I'm really proud of, and it's also a great opportunity to show you a couple of techniques that I use all the time. The first is the AI subject recognition tool, where we just click subject, and in this case, it did a very, very good job of picking out what the subject is. And this is Emily, my wife, standing in the middle of the frame, taking in the majesty of the scene. Now, I think that Emily is a beautiful subject for the photo, but at the same time, she doesn't quite stand out. And so all I want to do is something really, really simple. I want to just bring in a little bit of exposure and a little bit of contrast. By doing these few basic edits, a little bit of exposure, a little bit of shadow boost, and a little bit of white boost, we've both increased the exposure and also maintained the contrast. It doesn't look unrealistic. Now, if we go too far with the exposure, it looks ridiculous, like some sort of HDR disgusting mess, and we don't want that, right? We want it to be really, really subtle, maybe 0.2 at the most of exposure. But she stands out now in a way that she didn't before. Now, this next technique is probably the most frequently used in really the history of photo editing, and it's just dodging and burning. I want to amplify the brightness of the glacier in the frame, and I also want to give a little bit more darkness to this mountaintop to kind of increase that sense of imposing nature to it. So first, I'm going to create a mask and use a brush. And I'm going to size this brush so that it's not too large. I can be precise. Let's get it down there. And I want it heavily feathered so that it has a subtle effect rather than having a really, really harsh one. And then what I'm trying to do with this glacier is actually just make it slightly brighter. So I'm going to increase the whites and the exposure, and I'm just going to start painting that in. So that glacier now has a little bit more of an added effect to it, giving it just a bit more oomph and also bringing it into the scene a bit more clearly. Now, one more. So now we've done a bit of dodging. Now let's do a bit of burning on the mountaintop up here. And what I'm going to do is only work with the shadows and the blacks, because then we don't risk affecting these clouds. So really, I'm going to focus on the blacks, drop that by about 6, drop the shadows by about 5 or 6. And now really affecting that mountaintop. And that's having exactly the effect I wanted. Now, in that last image, I showed you how you can use a linear gradient to actually darken and create a bit of a vignette. In this case, I kind of want to brighten the foreground just slightly because I think it'll make the image feel a little bit more three-dimensional. So all of our masks have added this effect, making the whole image a little bit more three-dimensional and getting a little bit more of a priority given to some of the elements like the glacier and the mountaintop. This next image was taken in a chasm down near the south coast of New Zealand, and it's a really, really good opportunity to show my third technique and one of my very favorites. This is one I use on a lot of my photos to introduce that ethereal, dreamy effect, and it boils down to light diffusion. Now, there's a handful of ways we can do it, and the first and simplest is through radial gradient. Now, this is going to look a bit like how we did sun flares because in truth, it's not that different of a process. The sun flare involved softening the light, spreading it out, and ultimately diffusing it. And that's really what we're doing here as well. we'll boost the exposure just slightly, and then we will drop our clarity by about 25 to 30, and we'll drop our dehaze to about -16 or so. Now, one other thing I like to do when I'm diffusing light like this is to actually drop the right side of our curve just slightly. When we have it at the top, we're allowing for the possibility of true white. And true white is something that's really uncommon. It's essentially white that's so bright it is pure white. And in this case, that's just not what we have. So by dropping this just slightly, we're actually almost like lowering the brightness value of it, but really it dulls it just a little bit. And I find that this actually aids in the diffusion effect. So we're gonna do that there. And I may even raise our blacks just slightly so that it kind of spreads out over the rock around it. Now, if I do a before and after, you can see how it's really softened that light. And this is the key light for the scene. It's where the eye goes arguably first or second, so it's quite important to make that light palatable and to bring people into the scene. Now, the next way we can do this is actually through a brush. And what we're gonna do is essentially the same effect, but we're gonna have a heavy feather so that it has a soft edge where we draw it in. And then again, we're going to lift that exposure just slightly. We're gonna drop that clarity, and we're gonna drop the dehaze, and I might even lift the whites just a little bit and drop the blacks to maintain a bit of contrast. And then I'm gonna paint it in wherever else I see that light. So in this case, we've got it on this beautiful green foliage. We have it up here on the rocks and the light coming in. We have it on the soft edges that the golden light is kind of coming in and hitting. So we can paint it in there, and you can sort of do this as much or as little as you want. But ultimately what we're doing is diffusing the light, softening it, and creating a little bit more of an ethereal effect. Now, a lot of people add the Orton effect in their photos, and I actually do often as well. But whether you want to do that or not, you can actually add this to get some of that soft effect without having to go through the whole process of introducing Orton. This is just a way to sort of create a softness in the image. So let's look at the before and after of all of that. It's a subtle effect, but you'll notice that everything has a little bit more of a bloom to it, and that creates that ethereal effect that you'll find in a lot of my work. Now, this final technique is really the precision technique, and it's not one I actually have to use all that often, but when it's essential, it's very, very essential. It's also arguably one of the more advanced ways of using Lightroom masks, and once you start to grasp it, you start to realize all the possibilities. So hopping into this photo, we have one of my favorite photos of the whole year, and it's really simple. Just this tree growing out from this really wet forest wall on the west coast of New Zealand. So what's going on is there's this beautiful branch, beautiful tree, and it's got this really vibrant foliage that's a bit of a different color and a different tonality than all of the foliage around it. And really, for this image, all I'm trying to do is exaggerate that fact. I just want to take what's already bright and make it just that little bit more clear so that it pops. It both gives it a bit of three-dimensionality, but it also defines what the subject really is in the image. Now, our inclination might be just to brush over it and try to paint in some level of brightness, and that can work a little bit. We can kind of do it this way very manually, but it always looks a little bit funny, and so that's not the way I like to do it. What I like to do is take a brush, actually make it quite large to cover this whole subject. So we've got the whole subject covered, and then we're gonna right click on that mask. And we're actually gonna go down to intersect mask width, and we're gonna go to the luminance range. Now what we want to do here is use this luminance picker, the little eyedropper on the screen, and we wanna put it on the luminance range we're trying to select. And so in this case, I'm gonna pick a bright portion. And now you can see that it's chosen all of the brightest parts of this image. If we need to refine, get rid of a little bit of those darks and bring it in even more towards the brights like that, we can do that. And then at this point, all I'm gonna do is lift those up a little bit, lift the whites up, and you can see it's only affecting the exact parts we wanted it to affect. It's giving that pop to that very specific part of the image. In this image, I might even add another broader gradient, radial gradient right in the middle, just to give the entire image a little bit of a boost. But otherwise, it would be a very, very simple edit. That's exactly how I did it. So that concept of intersecting masks together is viable in any combination you can imagine, right? You can use radial filters over different color ranges and use an intersection with a specific color range to isolate what color you want to use. You can do the same thing by doing a brush over a various range of space and doing a luminosity intersection. Whatever combination you can imagine, you can do it. And it's a very, very powerful way of looking at Lightroom. I can't give examples of all those things without using hours of your time, so I'm not going to, but I think this example illustrates it really well. Just turning this off and on shows exactly how much we're able to pop the image while keeping it very well refined and clean. And with that, that's everything I wanted to cover today. Masks are so crucial to the editing process, and no image is complete until I've finished my comprehensive edit. It is the most powerful tool we have in Lightroom, and it's the tool that professionals rely on. So teach yourself how to do it, play with it. Play with each of these tools, each ways of intersecting them, and you'll start to open up the bounds of what your editing can do for your imagery. And have fun with it, be creative with it. We're trying to be individuals. Take that time to find what style suits you, and your images will reflect the passion that you show in your creativity. Cheers.